On the program today, General Gilbert Diendere is charged with complicity in the murder of Burkina Faso's former president, Thomas Sankara. Female suicide bombers killed 27 people in the Chadian island of Koufoua on Lake Chad. Then, as leaders deliberate over a future climate change deal, African countries try to cope with the changes. What the heck is all the confusion for? Hello everyone, welcome to Network Africa. I am Amarachi Ubani. Before we get right into it, here's a review of stories that made headlines over the weekend. Beginning in the Central African Republic, an attack which has left 8 people dead at a camp in Ngakobo, where displaced people have been camping. The attack happened shortly after Pope Francis left the country after a visit there during his Africa tour. Also, 5 of the attackers from the mainly Muslim coalition, the Seleka, were killed and 2 others were wounded. Over in Algeria, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika returned to the country on Sunday following a brief visit to Paris for a medical checkup. A 78-year-old who had suffered a stroke back in 2013 was in France late last weekend. It's been a while that he's been seen on state television. We'll end in Rwanda, where President Paul Kagame is yet to decide whether he will seek a 3rd term in office when the country holds a referendum next month. First elected in 2003, President Kagame was seen as Rwanda's main power broker long before then. He's still not announced whether he will be running another term in office, which will be his 3rd since being elected. But let's head down now to Burkina Faso, where General Gilbert Diendere is being charged for his role in the murder of the country's former president, Thomas Sankara. Sankara was murdered by a group of soldiers, but the exact circumstances of his death have not been known. But an autopsy found that his body was riddled with bullets. General Diendere was said to have been a close friend of the late president and was his intelligence chief. Political ally, he's also already in detention and is facing charges in connection with a 7-day coup in September. He is the most senior official to be charged in the country in relation to the murder. For the first time in a long while, Libya's 2 rival parliaments have finally reached an initial agreement to end the country's political crisis. Leaders are hoping the deal would eventually lead to a single government and election in 2 years. This comes after a number of attempts by the United Nations to help the country deal with its political crisis. In October, it submitted its own blueprint for a deal leading to a united government, but neither side has endorsed it. Libya has been unstable since military dictator Muammar Gaddafi was killed in October 2011. The first deputy of the GNC said the latest development is a historic moment for Libyans. African leaders are back in their countries, having received a promise from China that their countries would benefit from a $60 million 10-project plan for the continent. The outcome of the 6th Forum on China-Africa Cooperation that held over the weekend in Johannesburg, South Africa. South Africa's President Jacob Zuma has referred to the summit as a win-win and that the momentum of rapid growth in Africa is unstoppable. It has been an intense 2 days of talks at the China-Africa Summit, and while the focus had been briefly on China's latest announcement of investment, President Xi Jinping indicated that what China wants from Africa is a lasting relationship of growth and partnership. During his speech on Friday, President Xi suggested that China and African countries stick to equality-based and win-win cooperation, strike a balance between principles and profits, and jointly build a community of common destiny. He also wants China and Africa to focus on practical cooperation, oriented to capacity building, and both sides will pursue green and sustainable development, and promises that China would help its African partners deal with climate change, improve environmental protection, and train professionals in related areas. It's a partnership, it seems, the African Union, on behalf of African countries, is willing to explore. Co-chair of the summit, South African President Jacob Zuma, said African countries need China's help to process their abundant natural resources, which he said had made the continent vulnerable to exploitation in the past. The $60 billion promised Africa would be non-reimbursable and would cover 10 major programs in industrialization, agricultural modernization, infrastructure, financial services, green development, trade and investment facilitation, poverty reduction and public welfare, public health, people-to-people exchanges, and peace and security. President Xi met with President Muhammadu Buhari on the sidelines of the summit. Both leaders agreed to strengthen cooperation in infrastructure, construction, security, agriculture, and other sectors.
Well, we have, this government is now getting to 7 months. But we have inherited projects into the previous government side with China, especially in infrastructure, railways, and then working in agriculture in a number of the states. And the Chinese farms are magnificently performing, they are doing very well. And I promise at the head of this government now to consolidate those gains, and then I will write to ask for a visit to China.
Okay,
the latest towards the end of the first quarter.
End of
first quarter.
Okay.
Around March, April next year.
Since the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was formed in 2000, African leaders have only met once in 2006. The growing partnership has overtaken that of traditional partners, Europe and the United States, with the volume of trade with China and Africa reaching $220 billion in 2014. Coming up on Network Africa, 4 suicide bombers wreak havoc on a town near the Lake Chad region. Please stay with us.